Heyo, welcome to the Industry Idiots podcast. Turns out you're listening to last week's episode, and you can listen to today's episode if you head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/industryidiots. For supporting, you'll get it a week early and access to one Patreon-exclusive episode each month. Either way, thank you and enjoy this episode. Bye!
Hello.
Hi.
New episode.
Hi, I'm Sam. Hi, Sven.
Hello, Sam. I'm also here. I'm Sven.
How have you been? What is developing in your life?
Well, I'm not developing much. I'm helping people develop stuff in that sense. But yeah, trying to dodge the usual health situation and navigating the home office life. Every day feels like, how do you call the movie? What's the meme with Bill Murray, the one where every day feels a little bit like the same?
Groundhog Day, yeah.
Groundhog Day. Oh, yeah.
It's a great movie.
So it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day.
It's one of my 8 favorite movies.
8? You have a movie top 10 list as well?
Yes.
You want to add that to the episode from last week?
No, wrong topic for our podcast, I would say. But Groundhog Day is in there. I don't know, I just love Bill Murray. What are you developing? Can you even tell?
No, I can't really.
Damn, okay.
Not yet. No Sven leaks.
It's what's supposed to go on, right? We are stuck at home. Everyone's stuck at home. It's not we're not unique special flowers. No, everyone is stuck at home. So while you're listening to this, you're probably sitting at home. So welcome to our at-home hangout.
And also probably descending a little bit into madness like everyone else.
Yes, we have just started today, actually, Sven and me. We are fasting buddies. So we do intermittent fasting together now with this app. Fucking amazing.
Which is heavily gamified.
It is gamified, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting topic. How hard can you... I have always had this idea in my head, actually, that's now that you're saying it. A gym membership, okay, let's just forget that Corona exists. Gym membership, you have this membership card, and this membership card does not come from your gym, but instead comes from your insurance. And your insurance, with this membership card, you go train, and it tracks what you're training, and not only going into the gym, but also how many reps, how much weight is on the machine. It tracks everything, and you're being rewarded for it. Because you make your insurance through staying healthy, you make your insurance have to take a less of a risk. So they reward you with, I don't know, vacations or coupons or whatever you want.
With a fucking cruise.
Yeah, $20 on Amazon, doesn't matter. What they are saving in terms of risk money, essentially half of that they put back into you. And all of this is extremely gamified. You can add your friends and you can see their scores and how much they're benching and whatever and how fit they are. And then you can just intertwine. Of course, this goes heavily into privacy laws and whatever. But then you can intertwine this and you can make real life a game, essentially. I've had this in my mind for a long time, but probably
It's actually
impossible.
a great idea. I mean...
well, now it's out there. So guys, go ahead, steal it so I can go to the gym and essentially game while I'm doing it.
It's essentially game with your life.
Yeah.
Thing to do that would actually be like maybe not giving you the people like some kind of rewards in a sense of like materialistic rewards, but more like maybe a reduction of your monthly insurance fee. Something that like a small...
Which is also a materialistic reward. Yeah.
Fair enough, but not like trying to get into the pot of winning a cruise ship or something. That's way out of there. But smaller things like Amazon, I can see that happening.
Yeah, I wouldn't say winning. Like, just think about MMORPGs. Why are you... Or Call of Duty. You're playing Call of Duty right now. Why are you grinding that gold camo? Because you want that gold camo. So why am I grinding my health, my fitness and gym stuff? Because I want that gold reward. So that reward needs to be... Of course, it needs to be behind a long grind, but you need to see progress, and the reward needs to be big enough. So... somewhere in between the cruise and a $5 Amazon Gutschein. Coupon. Little German for you guys.
You can start flexing how healthy you are.
on your friends. I've got an game assurance score of, I don't know, 420, guys. Look at me. And then everyone else is like, wow, this guy is so fit. Well, could work. Especially I think the Steam friend list needs to be in there somehow. You need to be able to join and compare and achievements and everything with your friends for real life fitness.
With only your gaming friends? I mean, in that way, you would tie it to only your gaming friends. It should be like some omni thing with WhatsApp, Facebook, all the other social things merged into one hub.
Yeah, I don't mean taking the literal Steam friend list. I'm saying the friend list, how it works in Steam inside this app.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
I see.
Okay, let's see what happened. What happened this week? So let's stop talking about our personal endeavors. People are up to date now, I think. So a little bit, maybe. If you want to know more, I don't know, text us on Discord, or I don't know, send Sven inappropriate mail, something like that.
Yeah, I always respond to inappropriate mail. My favorite mail. In fact, I only get inappropriate mail all the time.
There's not at least one naked person inside this mail account, then it's not worth checking your spam folder, right?
Yeah, I would be disappointed otherwise.
There was I think that's the most design game developer gaming news that were this week, and that is Ghost of Tsushima, that they're not, which is great news, that they're not using waypoints in their open world, which is amazing. And they break. That just you tell us about it, Sven. I mean, it's your area of expertise.
Like open world design? Yeah, okay, it falls into level design.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, what they basically are doing with Ghost of Tsushima is that by default, I think all the waypoints in the world are turned off, but I think you can turn them on. I haven't researched that, but like the intended way of playing the game is navigating through the world by only like looking for landmarks or looking for the descriptions you get from NPCs, or generally like maybe a cinematic pointing you towards some area which is being highlighted. Like it feels much more natural exploring the Japanese world in the game. So that's what they were going for.
I mean, we have said that before in last week's special Easter 300 downloads episode, when we were talking about Morrowind, right? About the game not hand-holding your direction and your finding of whatever's lying hidden in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Quests not being shoved down your throat, that kind of stuff. And what I like, especially since I'm a big fan of immersion when it comes to open world and RPG and everything, those kind of games, I like that they're minimizing UI. There's not going to be UI waypoints, which is very important to me. The first thing I did was when first mod I've ever installed for Skyrim was hiding the compass, because it just takes me out of the game, and I want to be immersed in this world and not, I don't know, have some superficial compass that's not there in real life exactly pinpoint where the quest goal is.
That's exactly what I also touched on. I don't know if you read it like half a year ago or a year ago. I wrote a blog on like this concept in level design of leading lines. And I also started that blog point by saying like this compass and UI markers everywhere on the map and even in the 3D space, pointing you exactly where you have to go and like taking all the challenge out of it basically. And in this way, by not giving you the ability to, for example, fast travel to these markers, you experience much more of the world because you have to go everywhere by foot, for example. Maybe they have like fast travel hubs, like, I don't know, so that you, like in Dark Souls, you can travel between like Firelink shrines or something. But naturally, you pay a lot more attention to what's around you and not pay only attention to this one UI thing. So this is something where your like environment art and level design really has to shine and can shine in a way, because everything like how the world is constructed points you there and not UI points you there.
And to deep dive even further, I think it's a mix. The whole problem or the whole thing comes from two things: the casualification of the entire games world, right? All games becoming more and more casual as their audience grows, because the big part of the audience is casual, which is not bad, but needs gameplay adjustments. But in contrast to that, is just generally as a human being, when you learn something new, a new skill, a new way to use an app, a phone, anything new, it's super hard to learn the new thing. But once you can do the new thing, like your life gets 10 times better. So bringing that extra work is worth the payoff. And I think showing people that this payoff is worth it, in this case, learning how to navigate through the game's world through landmarks, learning the environment through like you would learn when you move to a new place, has the same kind of payoff like learning a new skill. So a little bit extra work, but worth it in the end for the player.
Greater payoff. Yeah, I can see that. Can you also imagine that one reason why they strip like these UI markers and stuff out of the game is by trying to like stretch a little bit of the playtime? Because what I always see from playing these games with the UI things, you just jump from marker to marker and it feels much more like a funnel instead of an open world. You're not getting sidetracked because there's this one thing always pointing you in a direction, so you don't get sidetracked as easily and you do follow straightly the path basically and not let everything happen. And maybe they are choosing that because the game is not as big, just as a theory maybe, and trying to lengthen a little bit of the playtime by making the player like go everything by himself and not hand-holding him too much.
Well, that's definitely an interesting point, and I think it could be a technique. What you just said about the markers on the map and everything, there's one big point that is like, even though I am in the other camp, I say please no markers, please no UI. There is one big thing that we are forgetting. In an open world, as you said, it feels like a funnel if you do quest after quest after quest, if you clue them chronologically. But if you're someone who does a quest, then gets sidetracked, does another quest, does a guild quest in between, and then you have these 20 active quests. One is reading books for the Dwemer's in Skyrim or whatever, and you have these 20 active quests, and then you don't play the game for a month and come back to the game, and then suddenly, imagine there would be no markers. How on earth would you be able to remember any of your 20 quests or anything, right? So in these situations, it's mandatory. It needs to be there. So either you streamline the gameplay, like in Dark Souls, for example, where it is an open world, but the different parts of the open world are essentially tunnels. You can only go through this area in one way or 3 ways or whatever, but it's not like a play like a world. I don't know. It's weird.
I'm not saying that games should take away like that journal or quest log or anything like that. Just by the way you are presented from quest to quest and how the world is designed, it feels like that following this quest results into the best experience the game has to offer. And I as a player, always feel like I have to follow that in order to see like the most high quality set pieces, the most designed and coolest things the developers put in there, and like random encounters feel a lot more random instead of them playing out and making up a cool like player driven story that no one has like intended to be there at that exact location and moment in the pacing of the narrative.
Yeah, there's a different approach as well. I think if you're in let's just take a Skyrim dungeon, for example, because most listeners and us as well, we know those dungeons. So we are in this closed environment, but it's still heavily explorable because there's a million ways you can go, and there's one goal that is marked on the map. Now, if you have this goal marked, or you have this book that you have to read marked, or whatever it is, you go straight there, and you're de-incentivized, or you're not incentivized, if that's the correct English word. You guys know what I mean. To not look around. You go there and you're just drawn to there, right? And there's some players like me who then purposely not go there and go everywhere else until there's nothing else left and then go there, which is a valid thing to do. But also that's reverse funneled, right? I want to have this simulated. I don't know, none of these please every player. If you have the quest target marked, people are going to be frustrated because they feel like they have to clear everything because they can go there if they want to see everything. Then the second group is that nothing is marked and you're afraid that you're going to accidentally finish the main quest and then have no way to explore the rest anymore. And then there's the third one where everything is marked, and then we are gonna bitch about that there's too many markers and everything is handed to me on the marker system. So what is the great way, Sven? What is your ideal solution?
I don't think there is an ideal solution. It's just when making a game, you always have like think of a group or audience you want to make this game for, and see if it fits with the vision for your story, and then see if the systems you choose and the level of handholding you choose aligns with where you want to sell the game, and that ultimately drives how you want to design it. So, I mean, you probably wouldn't be creating an MMO without all the handholding, because it's very designed to go through this progression funnel and then become this level 80 super paladin that is able to do these types of skills in the designed end game, basically. But when there's no, let's say, no endpoint to your progression, and that you always stay at the same point power-wise, for example, then in that sense, I can imagine that you could design an open world where you can go everywhere and are already strong enough to be everywhere. A little bit like Breath of the Wild, for example. You can also go anywhere just right from the start. But if you're good enough, you can also kill the enemies, for example, you find. But sometimes you are, of course, underleveled. I mean, you can still level there.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some Metroidvania mechanics in there, I think. Some areas you can only reach with certain powers that you need to learn, but in general, I agree. There's another thing that I would want to say that sounds to me like an ideal solution, and that is, like in Morrowind, you ask this NPC, what's happening? What is this quest? Where do I find my silver horse that was cursed by a demon? And then he's gonna tell you, and you write it down into your little sketchbook, like your character does for you, of course, not you write it down. And then you go there, and then you have to follow. There's no markers, but you have this description where it is and where this description started in your sketchbook. So when you come back 2 months later, it's still gonna read. Paul Demon Horseman gave me in city whatever info this and this. So you can backtrack and still do it without the hand-holding of a quest marker. And I think if you build your world around this, that there's landmarks everywhere that can be easily identified, but not too easily, I think you can make a living, breathing feeling, but with minimal stressing of the player, that he doesn't feel lost or annoyed by your quest system.
I think one game that does that pretty well, which I mentioned last week on my top 10 list, is of course Divinity Original Sin 2, which doesn't have particular precise markers somewhere. You have this quest log, which all the conversations are being tracked in, and generally, like, when new information regarding a quest comes in, it's also like tracked in a chronological way. And basically, the log is only also telling you like some rough description of what you have to do. It's not telling you exactly, okay, go into this house, talk to this person, and kill him. So that would be the most basic explanation for the quest. And instead, it's written in a way that, okay, and in this area of town, there might be a person in the bar who is the murderer. Try to find out who the murderer is. So that way, it's like much more immersively written and presented than telling you straight what you have to do and then taking out all the fun for me out of it. Some players might see it differently, like wanting to be told everything exactly what they want to do.
It's also related to where you're coming from and why you want to play, I think, certain RPGs or gaming experiences. And it's hard to see outside of your own motivation. It's something that I face all the time, because I love RPGs for the sole reason that I love D&D. I've been dungeon mastering and playing D&D my entire life. And I constantly chase that feeling, right? It's hard to get your group together. It's a lot of preparation work. So I'm looking for a game that does that. I know you say that Divinity does that. So I'm can't wait to give that game a try. But what I'm saying is how a encounter or quest is designed in Dungeons and Dragons might be that you throw your players into in an occult, in an occult setting, maybe an old mansion or in a town, and then you introduce mechanics to them. Maybe if someone you tell one of them that they're possessed by a demon, and if he is found out, then he will the player character the demon is inhabiting will die. But you tell that to all the players, and in the end, no one is possessed by a demon. And then it's just, I don't know, a trickster god messing with them, and then you have the greatest fucking encounter and mission and quest and D&D session you've ever had, because they constantly try to not get detected being possessed by a demon, but it plays itself. So to create an experience like that in your video game, you need to somehow, not specifically that experience, but what I'm saying is that the quest target is not always the most important thing, right? So you need to make the world as interactive and allowing emergent stories, emergent gameplay to come, and player-driven stories. Then you don't need to worry about having to guide or not guide your player if they already enjoy the world as much, right? Does it somehow make sense? I don't know.
True, it makes sense, but how flexible should, on the one hand, the world be reacting to the narrative, and how flexible should the narrative be reacting to what you do in the world? That's always like the balancing act I'm seeing in most games. That, like, for me, the most important thing in a game is like having a great pacing and flow of what you do. I don't want to do the same thing 8 hours straight, and I want to have some variations between the levels what you do, and sometimes you make use of this mechanic, sometimes make use of another mechanics, then only read a book, then carry something somewhere, not do like 20 fetch quests after each other. Like, how flexible does a narrative need to be to fulfill upon that goal?
I think it arrives at that age-old argument that we as well have had many times in Discord, is procedural generation. How much should there be in a game, right? When does procedural generation feel like you're playing a meaningless random thing? And where is it just an extension and a tool for the narrative designer to use? Because let's just be fair. If you're designing a city as a narrative designer or quest designer or writer or whatever you are in your game studio, it doesn't matter how 95% of the NPCs are named. So use procedural generation to generate the names. Maybe build houses and parameters for the procedural generation to build on, of course, as always, but it doesn't really matter. But if you go like the first iteration of No Man's Sky to ever release approach, where there's infinite amounts of planets, but none of them are of any significance to the player or the story, then it becomes a feeling of like, why am I doing this? Does this have an intended experience?
Yeah, that's a fair point. What I'm often seeing when looking into games that use procedural generation to create their content is that the games that do it well, the first one I'm thinking was actually a mobile game, and it's the most successful mobile game ever. It's Subway Surfers. And the endless runner thing is completely procedurally generated, but not like every meter. They are doing it in chunks, basically. So every 100 meter are like pre-designed sets. These sets are basically made by a designer, the way the wagons are like placed and stuff like that. And then you add these 100 meter chunks after another in a randomized way, which then create your parkour. But doing that for a story, like trying to write the story in types of chunks that can then happen, and then maybe that creates the flow out of your story. You have this sub story that takes about 20 minutes. You have another sub story that takes about 20 minutes, and doing this in whatever order is also then maybe randomized by the game, and then in that way you also have like generated content, but also a little bit curated so that it still has meaning, still has challenge, still has like some special design touch to it.
Yeah, as everyone out there knows who has ever touched the subject of procedural generation or played roguelikes, there's different depth in procedural generation anyway. You can procedurally generate everything. Like you can build the level from, like you can assign a certain behavior and mechanic and theme to a single tile inside of that huge level. Like this place is fire, and then it's just randomly throwing them together in a certain, like you put in some parameters, right? Or you can do, as you said, which we are doing in our game as well. We are building tiles, and it builds it. The game's arena, the fighting arena is built out of 7-8 tiles together, and that will result in a always unique arena, but not in itself working together tiles, right? So there's never a feeling of that this does not belong together, but it also reduces variance. People can see that things are being reused. You know, do you have an example for a game that uses procedural generation in its narrative? Maybe is Disco Elysium procedurally generated?
No, Disco Elysium is, as far as I know, completely handcrafted.
Okay,
but I can think of a game which is already like has been subject to a lot of memes just because the procedural generation result leads to some funny combinations, and that is Watch Dogs, and completely adds to what you mentioned before, how like name your NPCs in a funny way, and all the NPCs you encounter in the game have like this little box you can see with your phone what kind of occupation they have, what type of job, and what's special about them. And these combinations of names, job title, and what's special about them is like completely generated and random. So you sometimes have like a blood donor who has AIDS, for example, and then these funny combinations start to happen. Which
what a dark example! That is not fun.
It is a dark example, but these weird situation like then create your own personal story that only you maybe see, because how many NPCs on the game, like 1,000 different combinations, 1,000,000 combinations can happen between all the attributes and parameters. And then you are the one guy who meets this guy. I don't know, is that meaningful if you are the only one who encounters this one specific thing? Or is that also like not meaningful at all?
You're just describing what's carrying the identity of Animal Crossing right now. Everyone talking about their individual turnip prices. So crazy. Have you heard of this?
Nee, actually not.
If you go anywhere, if you talk to anyone who has Animal Crossing, or if you go into any Discord of Animal Crossing or the Reddit or whatever, they all talk about their turnip prices, because there's something, it's like shares that you can buy. Like you can buy these turnips once a month or once a week, I think. Once a week, yeah. From some pig in the game. And they have different prices for everyone. So sometimes people are extremely lucky and they get turnip prices where you can buy them for, I don't know, 80 Animal Crossing dollars. And then you have them. And then you buy an entire inventory of them. And then next week or a few days after, when you can sell them, someone on some island in, I don't know, a player from China or from the States has turnip prices where you can sell them for $1,000. So he posts his island somewhere on the Discord, and everyone goes to his island so they can sell their $80 turnips for $1,000. So all they talk about is turnips, so they can finance their islands. It's crazy.
I'm taking up some stock market vibes.
And that is a good example for something that is different for everyone, but it's connecting the player base in a manner that hasn't been done before.
But is that completely random how they do the prices, or is that tied or connected to the activities the player, or the progress, how much you have already achieved before? And when you are super wealthy in the context of Animal Crossing, then your prices may be higher, so you have actually something to waste your money on, basically. Or is that like, have people figured out what the connection there is? Or
I don't think they have figured out the connection, but there is people who are supposedly predicting patterns, like who can tell you from your current turnip prices what your turnip prices in 4 days will be. But who knows if they're right? These people exist for real life shares as well, so maybe don't trust them.
The Animal Crossing market analyst. That's what I'm going to write in my Twitter bio now once I get the game.
Stockbroker for Animal Crossing. I only exclusively trade in turnips.
Exactly.
Damn, dude. Okay. Well, that took a steep turn from narrative to shares, but I don't know. It's what people talk about right now. I think it's super funny, and it kind of makes me want to play the game. I love playing markets.
I mean, even if you wanted to play the game right now, you just can't, because the Switch is gone everywhere. Like, even if you want to get it, it's sold out. It's just, the demand is insane.
I mean, what did I read today? The Switch sold out worldwide. Yeah, 2 years after release. True. It's crazy.
2 years.
2 years after release, the game. It's a little. I mean, that's normal, right? People are at home now. There's an artificial, or not an artificial situation, but there's a situation that wasn't planned for, and people need to, I don't know, skip the time. It's like the Witcher game having the highest player ever when the Witcher series released. They didn't have as many players when the game released, or any time before, but on that day they had more players than ever.
Well, now they have a reason to, or an excuse to spend as much time on something like that.
Yeah, thankfully. That's nice to see. I mean, I know CDPR has, I don't know, people, there's always something going on there, but they have always been 110% for pro-consumer. And that is something so rare in today's development world that needs to be appreciated a lot. Yeah.
Didn't they also mention, talking about or adding to CDPR, that they also like have planned all the DLC for Cyberpunk or something like that?
They said that they will be revealed before release, and that they will not have less content than The Witcher 3, which is amazing.
Do they mean the Witcher 3 DLCs or the full base game? Like, are we speaking about hundreds of hours of content just as in DLC, which is already being planned, or will they probably reveal that at some point?
I don't think it's confirmed, but they are saying that they're approaching a similar DLC. Actually, in CDPR's world, it's not called DLCs, but extensions or expansion packs. And the DLCs are the little things that you can get for free, like the dress from Yennefer or the dress from Triss, the alternate dress. But they're approaching a similar expansion, whatever policy for like in Witcher. And as you know, Blood and Wine, or the other one, Hearts of Stone.
Hearts of Stone, yes.
They have almost more content than the base game, which is insane for someone. The first time that ever happened to me was Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. Back then on the PlayStation, and I'm always longing for something like this. Similar was Far Cry Blood Dragon. That was also an add-on, but was this completely weird, crazy standalone thing. And I love when people do this. And that Cyberpunk, I know it's controversial that they're announcing add-ons, DLCs, expansions before the game even releases, but given their track record and their fairness, why not? What's your take on it?
My take on it that I am actually getting hyped if a developer like commits to supporting the game even after release, because I know we both now kind of know what it takes in broad strokes to get these productions going, get these productions finished, and it makes sense that they plan as much ahead. And now that the game releases in about 5 or 6 months, of course, you now already are in pre-production for or even in production for the content that they want to drop after. So one part of the team is finishing and polishing the rest, and the other part of the team is already working on what's coming next. It's like only a natural thing. So I don't really can understand that people are hating the developers for trying to keep the content flow going.
Well, it's mostly, I don't want to diss any gamers, because you don't need to know about filmmaking to enjoy films, right? So you don't need to know about game making to enjoy games. But in this regard, what some people are thinking is that, if they already know what DLCs they're gonna do, why don't they just release the DLCs directly in the game? Are they cutting content from the game? But no, this is okay to think this, because it's fair to think this, because it has happened before many times. Developers have been doing this all the time. But just if you're looking at CDPR's track record, if you cut out a side quest or some little quest, or if you cut out some spells and then you release them through DLC, that's unfair. That's unethical, in my opinion. But if you take an entire world that has as much playtime as your base game in an entirely new branch of the game that has nothing to do with the base game world, then that, of course, is not cut content from the base game.
Yeah, and of course, at some point, as a studio, you want to keep the cash flow going, and you have to release at some point. You have to draw the line and make the content cut, like the feature freeze at some point, and you can't you stop adding stuff, and you want to put it out there. For example, let's say, hypothetically speaking, Rockstar is working on a story expansion for Red Dead Redemption 2, and the epilogue feels kind of in that sense. No spoilers, you haven't played it yet, but basically they already spent 6 years on the game making it, and now let's say they want to add what they might be working on the DLC to complete the rest of the main story and stuff like that. Then it would have taken 8 years, and the costs are not being covered by no release being out there. So that's also one reason why you want to get as fast as possible on the market to get your cash flow going.
Yeah, and it's only fair. I mean, we always talk about the 80-20 rule in terms of story and world building, where you build 80% of the world before you start writing, and in that writing there will be 20% only visible. And it's the same for game development. 80% of the work is pre-production and getting and finishing all the features and mechanics and everything that's gameplay related, and then you fill the world with content. And when you've already spent this absurd amount of money and time creating those working systems and intertwined design patterns and whatever is happening in the world, why not use them to add content later? I mean, it's just a fair way of making money that you deserve to make because you made a great system that works.
And once you've mastered your tool set and mastered your way of telling stories in your world, of course you want to make use of the mastery and not try to get into the next project where you start from scratch, basically. Of course, you can build on certain systems you have used before if you do a sequel, but you also want to provide something new, and that needs to be developed, conceptualized, ideation needs to be happening, and stuff like that, which is no small part to do. So,
yeah. And I think if a new developer tries this, right, or a AAA developer with a bad track record, we're not gonna name names, but then people are allowed to be skeptical, I think. Thinking, maybe this will not work. Maybe they will try to grab cash and lock amazing content that should have been in the game behind a paywall. But I think it's all about trust in the company, trust in the developer, and just Google it yourself and make your own mind up, right? Make up your own mind about it. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll see that optimism is the better choice here, even though I'm heavily against pre-order and blind trust in anything. But in this case, I think it's pretty safe to say that you're not going to be disappointed.
There's one thing I just remembered when you said about like trusting the quality of a studio and what the studio can pull off. There was this one talk from Jesse Schell, who is like one of the most known game design book author and stuff like that. And he talked about...
He wrote The Art of... How was the book's name?
The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses or something like that.
I think so too,
not sure. He's also like the CEO of a 120 people game company. They are specializing on educational games and stuff. But what he basically says in the talk, talking about like studio culture and leading a successful studio, is that you always try to do games that your company can actually pull off. So you do this one type of game. Let's say you're doing a real-time strategy game. Of course, to like save on costs and not forcing all your employees to learn a different type of game and to do a different type of prototyping all the time. Of course, your next title is gonna try to be, or you pick something that tries to be something that builds upon the previous thing in terms of systems, that you have a game with a quest system, that you have a game with a classic real-time interaction and stuff like that. So that was one thing I needed to think of when you mentioned that. So small sidestep.
I know that HR people, workers from the industry get a lot of, flack, and their roles or jobs aren't universally understood, but their job is actually one of the most important because they build the right teams, right? They find the perfect people because you can hire a million action combat shooter FPS designers and game developers, engineers, whatever. But if you get them together to make a VR story experience, it's probably going to take 30-50% more time, because they have to, first of all, understand the entire, they have to relearn everything they know about combat and game design and whatever, because they need to make it fit the new project. And if the new project is so far out of your comfort zone, as you said, right, that you're making an entirely different direction of game, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's going to take more resources, of course, since the specialized individuals have to re-specialize.
And that move is more feasible for AAA studios than indie studios. That's completely understandable that indie studios do like 3 or 4 games that are super similar, because they don't have as much money and can cut costs that way. Reusing systems, reusing the design conventions and patterns and whatnot.
And it's also a huge risk. I mean, for every successful game out there, like Ori and the Blind Forest or Hollow Knight, there's a million projects that fall off the table and never receive any attention or aren't good. Happens all the time. And then when you finally find something like this, when you hit your Ori and the Blind Forest, of course, you need to I don't know, you need to cling to that and make it the best it can be. And then after you've gathered the experience, maybe you can try to branch out. Right.
Oh, I think a great example for that would be like 2 series. The Bard's Tale, there are multiple entries, which are all similar. Trine would be a great example. Or Banner Saga as well. The 3 games play super similar, even though they have nuances and difference. Of course, you want to do something that you're now an expert at. So it's completely understandable.
But there's also interesting approaches to this by the people behind, I think there's only 2 people for the first part. It's Risk of Rain, right? The first one was a 2D pixel art roguelike. And for the second one, Risk of Rain 2, I have both games. I love both games. They 3D. It's now a 3D game. And they are reusing all their systems that are behind the thing, like how the hidden enemy spawn system works. It's an AI or an algorithm that essentially buys enemy types off of a shop, and depending on whatever time and how much worth and whatever the system can spawn enemies. And they are using that same system probably that they made for the pixel art version and 2D version in their 3D version, because that itself can be reused. Of course, they have to redo all the animations, all the 3D shit, but they're not stepping too far out of the comfort zone, but they're stepping further out of the comfort zone than most indie studios. So that's pretty cool.
It's not only indie studios choosing the approach of keeping the core and the systems and only reworking the presentation aspect of the game, which is basically what the Resident Evil games just recently did with Resident Evil 2. You play the same characters, you have the same villains, you have the same enemy types, you are at the same police station, and everything happens like in the original games. But the way it's presented, like you have a new camera, you have new controls, you have, of course, much nicer and more up-to-date graphics and lighting and assets and all that. But at the core, it still feels like the original. So even though it's vastly different in tech and in presentation, and so it's an understandable way of choosing what you want to do for the project.
And I think every it's controversial, especially if you are the creator of said thing, that at the point that I'm going to make. And I've had some friends of mine who are currently creating things and do exactly the opposite of what my opinion is on this. But if you're creating something, of course, it's your idea, it's your baby, and you want to create it. But the moment it hits the shelves and people fall in love with it and it gets bigger and bigger, you are not, even though it's your thing, you're not the only one anymore. Every single fan out there that helped you become what you are is now a part owner in a metaphorical sense, because they love what you did and they supported what you did, so they want to get you as big as you can, and then you get super big, and then you don't want to release a second part that just it shits on the first part in terms of what it is and what it's trying to be. So you need to find a sweet spot where you're not of course you still need to do things that you love, and it's only big because you did something that you love, but on the other hand, you also need to be fair to the people out there who love what you're doing. and not try to go too. It's a slippery slope, to be honest.
It's a devil's circle, to be honest. Like it's again a balancing act in which direction you want to do, redoing everything and providing innovation or keeping what is already familiar. It's, I think, every big franchise or every big brand and IP has this struggle of not either innovating too much or innovating not enough. Best examples are Star Wars. Best example, Call of Duty. You always keep the core that you already know, and then one game or one movie in the series is trying to change a little bit from the formula in this direction, and then maybe the fans hate it, maybe they love it, and then you either build on it or completely revert and start from zero and go into another direction. So
usually when I talk about this matter with someone or with people from colleagues or the industry, I try to bring up Alex Hirsch's quote. Alex Hirsch is the creator of Gravity Falls, one of my favorite cartoon shows, very beloved by its fans. And what he essentially said is not 100% in line with what I just said, but his quote is when he was asked who's the target audience of Gravity Falls, because it's very hard to define, right? It's looks very much like it's for children, but it's not. But on the other hand, it's not only for adults either. So what he's saying is that the target audience is me. I try to make something I would like. That's literally the only consideration. And it might sound a little bit selfish and against what I just said before, but the mindset is the right one, right? You're creating something and it's special because you're creating it for yourself and you have this unique vision. But on the other hand, if Alex was releasing a Gravity Falls second season or third or whatever season, and people start murdering each other, and it's going from a wholesome mystery show to a brutal, dark, depressed murder spree show, then I think he would never do that probably. But to ensure that doesn't happen, something needs to be in place, and this is the slippery slope that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. One show that excelled on this is Archer, in my opinion, because especially the later seasons, you still have the same cast of characters. You have still this very offensive humor, let's say it that way. But like the setting of the story, you have one in the 40s and the 50s. You have a Vietnam War time frame setting. You have one modern setting and stuff like that. It takes the formula and puts a unique twist and spin on it while not straying away too far from your roots. Let's say it that way.
Yeah, and Archer, I've seen all the seasons as well, is now, even though it's a TV show, it's a fantastic example for good world building, because Archer has so many hidden things going on. I don't know if anyone out there is aware of it or if you are aware of it, Sven, but they always have this insane Easter egg hunt. Decrypted ciphers in colors and RGB codes to, I don't know, you spectralize the audio file from the Archer, and then you go to come out at a website, and that website you have to enter secret codes from all episodes of Archer that ever were. That you have to really go down that rabbit hole, and this makes people. Of course, Archer is telling a story, and this main story is happening, but people engage with Archer's worlds super heavy just because of everything that's hidden and mysterious put into the game, into the series world. And if you do the same for your games, people will come back to your game even though they have finished the main story.
Can you think of a game or name a game that tried to do something similar? Thinking of like putting Easter eggs everywhere, like tons of Easter eggs. For example, there's this one Easter egg in Witcher 2, which is obviously a reference to another game, like where there's let's say some peasant in a white robe, and he's lying dead on the ground beneath a bunch of like in a haystack basically, and that's an obvious reference, of course, to the Assassin's Creed series. But that's a much more on the nose Easter egg than what you have been talking about. Like there's one thing in, I think, Battlefield 4. There was this one community map released in this Asian temple setting, and there were buttons all around the map and stuff like that, and you have to press those in the right order and at the right time of day in game context, for example, and then other stuff opened up in the map, and then at some point, even though the payoff, I don't even know what the payoff was, I think it wasn't as special.
I know it.
You know it? Okay.
I know it because I have done it, and it has taken months for the community to solve. There were Morse codes hidden in the game soundtrack. There was things that need to be done by 20 players at the same time. It was crazy, and it was so long. It spanned multiple weeks and months of content to finally achieve it. And what it unlocked was a bow in the game, the Phantom Bow. And I am a proud owner of that bow, and I played no other weapon after I unlocked it. And it's the only way to unlock the weapon as well. So that's super crazy.
That's absolutely insane Easter egg. There's some extra mile stuff by the developers putting that in there, to be honest.
But to come back to your question of games like heavily using this, I can't think of a big one right now. I know that many games employ Easter eggs that they have in many iterations, like Diablo hiding that level that everyone knows with the bunnies or whatever, that beautiful level, and blah blah blah, that kind of shit. But if I'm thinking Easter eggs, I think Stanley Parable. I know those aren't necessarily Easter eggs, but the game is built around non-linearity in a linear game. Like, it's so crazy. It's one of the most mind-blowing narrative experiences you can have, because while you're playing, the narrator comments what you're doing. If you haven't played Stanley Parable, for people out there, first person, you start in an office. You just, looks, no one's there. It's just you in that office, and the narrator goes like, Stanley was sitting in his office. He was, I don't know, done with his work. And then you take control and you start walking, and then the narrator goes with, Stanley leaves his office. And then you go down the hall, and then the narrator goes, Stanley's going down the hall. And that kind of stuff. And at first you think, after your first playthrough, oh wow, okay, this was a cool game, some puzzles, some whatever, and you reached all the way, and how crazy that they wrote this narrator to completely narrate what I'm doing. Crazy. And then you find out there's like 50 different endings, from going into a secret disco room to, I don't know, defying the laws of physics, and everything is, I don't know how they do it. I think it's with animation and walk and distance timings, but the narrator narrates everything. And sometimes this goes into this meta level of Stanley doesn't know what button to press. So, not following the narrator's advice, he of course presses the right button while you're standing there not having pressed the button. So now you're like, wait, should I do what the narrator says and press the right button because I'm not doing what the narrator said? But then I'm following the narrator again, so I'm in this moral dilemma, and this is just crazy shit. And yeah, this is what hidden game worlds should be. Like 50 different things.
One big thing of the Stanley Parable, like, which incites that you experience like most of the game, is like disobeying what the narrator says at the right moment. Because I've seen that there was in this game design subreddit, there was a graph where someone tried to map all the different branches of the game, and if you look at that tree is insanely big, and there's this one huge chunk of content that is bound to a completely ridiculous decision. Like 1/3 of the game you would never see if you wouldn't decide in a way at one point in the game.
That's what I mean. This is what hidden, again, the 80-20 rule. This is what hidden content should be. You have this extended, intended experience linear playthrough of the world where you encounter 20%, 30% of the game world, and then you have these other 80% of the game world that you can find. You can go out to find Easter eggs, hidden quests, whatever. And that makes everything come alive. And yeah, with Stanley Parable, it's we did, a good friend of mine, the co-founder of our company as well, Carlo, he and me, we did a analysis of Stanley Parable in the first year of our college time, and this game is just amazing. And you're right, by defying the narrator, the game is about free will. So in the end, it's about, do you break free or do you not break free of the mundane, or do you have free will or not? But now picture this: if you defy the narrator, if your idea of free will is doing the opposite of what the narrator says at all given points, then you're still doing what the narrator says. You're not doing what you want. You're doing what you think the narrator doesn't want you to do, which is in turn again doing what the narrator wants. And and then you have these crazy things where you're supposed to, I don't know, hit one button on the keyboard, you jump out of the window, and then a 30-minute video is triggered, and you don't even know what's happening.
Yeah, well, the freedom lies at at the point where you, let's say the game is a series of from 5 to up to 20 decisions you make in each room or each hallway or each situation, and at what point you decide to obey or disobey. You have, for each of these points in time, you have the opportunity to either do it or not, and sometimes even just ignore and wait, for example, and like not even answer, which is maybe like a third option, which is kind of in the middle of obeying and disobeying. So there's the freedom in the game, basically deciding at one point you think, okay, that's enough for me, or that's not enough for me. Okay, I want to see this.
Yeah, but then again, if that's the point, and you're like, okay, for sometimes in games you're like, okay, if things come up emergent, if the player finds his own story, cool, right? And that's what you want. You want to build a playground for them to interact with, and then they're gonna build their own story from it and their own cool experiences. But in Stanley Parable, if you're in this constant fight of, do I have free will or not? Am I following the narrator or not? And you're just super smart and genius, and you're like, okay, you know what? The only way to win this game, if the target is to have free will, is to not play. So you close the game. And that in turn again unlocks an ending, because that's also something they plan for, or just standing AFK in the game. And then suddenly you're in this game world and you're like, okay, everything I do is anticipated by the game designers and in turn by the narrator. So there's nothing I can do to surprise the game itself. And that's, I don't know, it's something to chew on and think about. Please play the game, guys. Look at the endings, all that shit.
Isn't there even also like a Steam achievement you get when not touching the game for about 5 or 10 years, or some ridiculous amount of time?
Wait, I'm gonna look it up. Yes.
Yeah. But I was also thinking, and I just forgot the line of thought, but was basically that when you are playing through the game the first time, you don't know that there are multiple pathways to go. Once you complete your one string of choices you made, you get respawned into the same room, and the game doesn't tell you that it's like that you're going through the same thing again. And you just might have chosen a pathway that's only 15 minutes. You might have chosen a pathway that takes about 2 hours or something. And then you sit there, okay, is it that now? It's like, am I done? Am I supposed to do something now? And I was, the first time I played, completely surprised, because I took a pathway that only took about 15 minutes, and then the credits were rolling basically. And the game told me like, okay, that's it. It's the end. And I was like, wait, this game was like praised so much. There must be more to it. And then I went, grabbed some water, and was AFK in this room for 3 minutes. And then the narrator started reacting to that. The thing you mentioned before was like, okay, there's one series of choices where you just don't do anything in the beginning.
Yeah, and usually you think in games that you touch like this, or if there's like a super crazy decision in Witcher or in any game you're playing, that, okay, this is going to affect the future of the game and whatever. But once you're through, right? But with Stanley Parable, you just slowly start to realize that everything you can do is like a choice, and it's still everything is still narrated. So it's just crazy. It's a mind-blowing experience. Go play the game. The achievement is, by the way, named Go Outside, and you are not allowed to play the game for 5 years to unlock this achievement. So even if you choose not to play the game to win and have free will, you still don't.
You're still playing the game for achievements. Nice.
Exactly. It's crazy. Just maybe it should have been in one of our lists. It's definitely in the honorable mentions. One of the craziest or most unique experiences.
Yeah, most unique and most influential indie games for sure.
Yeah, I think Anti-Chamber is on a similar level, not in terms of mind-blowing narrativeness, but in mind-blowing mechanics. Right, their level design mechanics, where it's constantly fucking your mind as well, with walls inside of walls.
Please explain. I haven't played it.
Oh, you have that. If you have to play it, especially, just think of what Stanley Parable is doing with your mind and choices, and now put it into making these choices by your movement. Right, you have optical illusions that, like these optical illusions with 3 rows becoming one, and you walk down that one row, and then suddenly you're in a room, or you go through a door, and then after you go through the door, you're in the same room, and you keep going through the door, and you always end up in the same room, but you go back, and then everything is different. This is the kind of game Anti-Chamber is.
Okay.
It just fucks with your mind in a more room and 3D kind of space way.
I think I have I remember seeing screenshots of this type of mindfuck game. I like these puzzle games that are providing you a little bit with these weird physics puzzles or perspective puzzles that when you walk down a hallway, then you turn around and it's completely different and tries to lead you some intended way. And then, okay, the answer was right there, but behind you and stuff like that. I love that.
I have to be honest, I don't like it if it's a gimmick or if it's too small to hinge an entire game upon, but you still do it. Like in The Witness. The Witness is very beloved. Everyone, this highly praised game. I played it myself. It's a good game. It's a very, very good puzzle game and hard as hell to win. But
oh, yeah.
It's the shtick of using perspective, and sometimes the 2D puzzle in front of you using merges with the 3D environment is a shtick. All right. After an hour, you understand that this is happening constantly, and until the end of the game, it keeps happening. Of course, it always finds unique ways to use that, but not in the terms of like anti-chamber, where it's more you're completely mindfucked and everything works differently every 10 minutes of the game. But both are fantastic, of course. I want to slander them. They're both amazing games, but they're different.
I think Nintendo is really good at that, at trying to push a mechanic up to its like they have this level design approach, which like is heavily inspired by this Japanese model. Not sure how it's called, Kisho Tenketsu or something like that. I completely butchered the term now. But the Mario games are super like prominent for those. And then there was also a video from like Game Maker's Toolkit that was exploring that. And what they are doing is basically take one shtick, one type of mechanic or gameplay system, explore it, introduce it to the player, then pose a few challenges, then try to completely turn what the player already knows on its head. Like using the same system, but maybe adding something unique into it. And then they combine this set of mechanics basically with another familiar one. And that's the way they build the difficulty curve over the levels basically. And I find it super fascinating that you, of course, can build like 1 hour or half an hour of your game around a specific mechanic, but at some point it always gets stale, so you have to add something new. And this is where like the Mario games, even though being a platformer at their core, really excel at. You in each stage, in each world, you do something different while still being a platformer.
And it's not that old, right? I mean, when you talk about Nintendo and Mario and stuff originating and design and level philosophies originating, he started doing that on Super Mario Galaxy for the Wii, which is long ago, but not too long ago. Not the kind of Mario you're thinking about if you hear Mario. That's where he started doing that, and it's from from Hayashida, and he's the land director for Super Mario 3D. And he came up with this: every time you encounter a new world, you encounter a new mechanic as well, and then it keeps on going. And I think that's pretty cool to do. On the other hand, I imagine a very long game would struggle with that, because then in the end you have 200 systems and none of them are meaningful, and you struggle to reuse all of them. You want to have a fluid gameplay feel, right? And not too many systems in the end.
That's where a lot of level designers say they use the rational level design method, which you, of course, probably also heard of.
Heard of, but please explain.
It's basically, to break it down to its most basic explanation, you put up a table or an Excel sheet, list all the levels and the progression after each other, and it's a way to design your difficulty. So you say, I'm using mechanic A in level 1. In level 2, I'm using mechanic B. In level 3, I'm using mechanic A and B. And then it like is over this chart, over this table, you can really see at what point which mechanics like intertwine to each other. And then you try to build your levels that follow up in the progression and the difficulty curve, making use of this Excel table, basically. So that's I can see elements of that also in the Nintendo approach, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as for me, as someone who wasn't up until now, didn't know that this was a thing, as a name thing and a name method. I see this very much like a Metroidvania approach to things, right? You can, even though it's linked, it's the other way around. It's not you encounter a new area and now you can learn a new thing. It's the other way around. You learn a new thing, and now you can encounter this new area that is built for this thing, right? But it still has variety, right? Because you might find a dash before you find a double jump, and then you're in the double jump area without the dash. But you have designed this area to be not like, imagine you found the dash first, and then you have both in that area, and then now this area still needs to be as hard as it would have been without that additional dash that you found. And with the approach you just mentioned, I think it sounds easier for the designer to create a meaningful and manageable experience for the player.
It's to be honest, we're using it for our project right now as well, because it's like a puzzle game where you have different types of tiles and obstacles you have to overcome, and keeping track of when you introduce what at what type or time of game progression is super helpful. Having this overview document and seeing, okay, the player should, hypothetically speaking, already know this mechanic, so I can reuse it and add this on top. And then you have like a more visual recollection of what you have already communicated to your player via introducing the mechanics.
Ah, okay. Makes sense to me, I think. Thank you for explaining, for sure. I've unintentionally used it a little bit when I was designing balancing the combat encounters and the wave spawning for our roguelike. But I feel like it's very hard to make meaningful design decisions in, like, the more unknowns you introduce, because in our game the player can pick any of the abilities for his starting ability, and random drops can give him any abilities, and blah 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 blah. I can never predict what kind of abilities he has. I can only predict the power level, but I can't predict special interactions. So I'm super how's this called? Not impressed, also impressed, but
fascinated.
I'm looking up to the great minds behind Risk of Rain, behind Binding of Isaac, behind all of these games that managed to create a fantastically well-balanced experience with a huge number of unknowns and random items and random whatever encounters. It's amazing.
Having to balance and design a progression tree that is not linear must be an absolute nightmare from a design perspective, trying to account for every fucking possibility and matching all the different systems together and stuff like that. I think, imagine you have worked on Path of Exile with that humongous skill tree and...
Wait, you gotta tell the people who, like, Path of Exile is similar to Diablo, an RPG from above, and the skill tree is well known for having over hundreds of points that you can go. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, you have three, if I recall it correctly, 3 main directions you can go, but inside these 3 main directions there are like 20 choices you can do from the start, or at least within the first 10 levels. So each playthrough in Path of Exile can be completely different because you have a different ability, and then this adds so much replay value to the game. But there's so much you have to account for when designing combat encounters, because your player can have 20 different skills already in the first challenging combat encounter. So
yeah, if you want to see something cool, guys, just Google Path of Exile skill tree, and go to Google Images though, and you'll be blown away. This is amazing for everyone who hasn't played the game. But to let you in on a little secret, I would say, there's something that is like a design philosophy for all people who create roguelikes or procedurally generated games for the player to engage in with a lot of randomness, and that is that it also is more lenient, because players will chase that high. They will chase that ultra run where they have you essentially balance the percentage of times they can encounter a run that is incredibly OP. Like when you have the controllable blood tears and in Isaac, where you can literally stand in a corner flying and win the entire game with it. And this is the run that people chase. And for every run that happens, they will not care if they encounter 100 runs that didn't work, because they're still all the way focused on that cool run. So if they get shit combinations, they will be more lenient towards you as a designer or developer of this game than someone who will play a linear experience that you handcrafted for them, and then something doesn't work, they will immediately jump your throat, right? So that's, at least there's more lenience.
So more in a sense forgiveness to I'm not getting what I wanted out of this game maybe in the next tries.
Yeah, as long as it's not too frustrating and it's a little bit like a dark pattern. It is a dark pattern to design, not putting shitty items in there, but to give enough variety on item builds so there can be bad item combinations that aren't bad per se, but they aren't good enough to dominate the game. So the players will be forgiving until that cool one happens, as long as you ensure that cool one ever happens.
But aren't you basically in every game that has some kind of progression running through a tree where are you not badass up until the very last unlock?
It depends on your progression system. Our progression system is mastery through skill and mastery through learning patterns and learning and dying and coming back. So that's a different progression. But in a more story-driven or linear progression where you have this like God of War, where you want to achieve this God of War status where you're insane, of course you keep chasing that perfect, fully fleshed out character, but on the other hand, you don't really care so much about restarting and dying and everything that you do in a roguelike.
I'm always wondering how games can make dying seem less of a player failure, that you sell them the process of dying. Dark Souls is, for example, it tells you right in the face you died, which also translates a little bit from like developer perspective POV. Ha ha ha! You're not good enough. Basically, that's what I'm getting from the game. If it tells me in capital red letters you weren't good enough, and I'm always imagining how games can make it like failure a lot more forgiving while not taking away the stakes basically of the game.
Makes sense to me, but on the other hand, players don't generally want that. Players don't want the death to feel frustrating. Yes, agreed. But what players, I think many players, not all of them, everyone's different, but what the majority of your player base doesn't want is for the death to be due to randomness, due to the game not working right, due to unfairness. Mm-hmm. They want their death to be a manual failure of themselves, so they can be like, oh, I failed, I know what I did wrong, but I can now do it better. And if the game would be frustrating, then that would be like, it was unfair that I died here, it wasn't my fault, it was the game's fault. But as you said, there are systems like in the new Call of Duty, the Gulag, for example. You still know, oh my god, I lost that encounter because that guy was clearly better and trained more than I did, or I played that encounter wrong. But I do get a second chance here, win this 1v1 in the Gulag so I can get back into the game. And that's a good compromise, I would say.
Well, that's what from watching my roommate play a lot of Sekiro, that's what like the Dark Souls series also seemingly learned, giving the main character a second chance. That shadows die twice, it's in the name basically. You play it and you even though while still having the potions and regaining life, you have the second chance.
Yeah, without taking away from that it's your fault feeling, which is, in my opinion, the best feeling to give the player, that if he dies, it's his fault, so it's not random, and he can learn from it. Just like failure in real life. Okay.
Fair enough.
Good talk. Good talk. And we're already way overdue, and we're at the end of our episode. But this was I enjoyed this talk very much.
I enjoyed it too.
Let's say our proper goodbyes to everyone out there.
You can, of course, find us on all the social channels, Twitter @IdiotsIndustry and Instagram IndustryIdiots. If you want to follow us, you find all the updates there for new episodes releasing and stuff like that.
And super funny handcrafted by Sven promo images where we superimpose our heads most of the time into arts from the games that we'll talk about in the episodes. It's most often ridiculous, but also, I don't know, I always get a good laugh out of it. You can also write us a funny 5-star review on iTunes. We'll read it in the show. If it makes either of us laugh or roll our eyes, both are fine. And as always, You can also join the Discord, chat with us, and suggest games or topics that we should definitely talk about. And otherwise, thank you for listening. It's really greatly appreciated. And we are having a lot of fun. We are having a lot of fun with the feedback and you guys engaging with us. And, it feels like we're just hanging out in this difficult time. And please keep it up.
All right. Stay safe, stay healthy. And until next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye.